In recent days, the conflict between the United States and Iran has been rapidly moving to a new and far more dangerous level. What only a few days ago looked like a series of reciprocal strikes and limited operations is now increasingly beginning to resemble a full-scale regional war whose consequences could change the balance of power in the Middle East and hit the global economy with a force comparable to the largest energy crises of recent decades. According to a number of Western publications and analytical centers, the Iranian leadership has decided to move to a strategy that some experts are already calling the most painful blow to the interests of Washington and its allies. It involves systematic attacks on the energy infrastructure of the Persian Gulf countries, primarily oil terminals, oil refineries, and gas complexes, some of which belong to or are controlled by Western corporations. According to international media reports, Iranian forces have already carried out strikes on facilities in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, including oil refining capacities and large gas enterprises. In several cases, the strikes were carried out using drones and cruise missiles, and in some episodes, the targets were not only energy facilities, but also the infrastructure of ports and oil terminals, through which oil exports to Europe and Asia pass. These attacks are taking place against the background of continuing strikes by the United States and Israel on military facilities inside Iran, turning the entire region into a zone of extremely dangerous escalation. According to energy market analysts, the consequences are already beginning to be felt. Oil prices have started to rise sharply, and markets react to every report of new attacks almost instantly. The reason is simple. A significant portion of the world's oil supply passes through a narrow maritime corridor, the Strait of Hormuz. About 1/5 of all global oil trade and a large share of liquefied natural gas pass through it. Any destabilization of this region automatically triggers alarm in global markets. That is why experts say that Iran's strategy may be aimed not so much at achieving military victory on the battlefield, as at creating global economic pressure on the United States and its allies. By destroying or temporarily disabling the energy infrastructure of Washington's partner countries, Tehran is effectively demonstrating its ability to influence the global oil market. And this weapon may prove to be no less powerful than missiles and drones. Insiders from diplomatic circles claim that within the US administration, a scenario is now being actively discussed in which the conflict could lead to the largest energy crisis since the oil shock of the 1970s. Behind the scenes of international organizations, warnings are already being voiced that if attacks on oil infrastructure continue, oil prices could soar to levels the global economy has not seen for many years. The situation is further aggravated by reports that have appeared in recent days about new strikes on tankers and ports in the Persian Gulf region. Some vessels have been damaged, and tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has slowed sharply. According to analysts from transport companies, hundreds of oil tankers are now effectively waiting because insurance companies refuse to insure voyages through a potentially dangerous combat zone. This is already beginning to affect global oil logistics. Oil refineries in Asia and Europe are receiving raw materials with delays, and traders are being forced to revise their contracts and look for alternative sources of supply. Against this background, many analysts warn that if the conflict drags on the global economy, may face a new wave of inflation. An especially alarming signal was that Iran has begun striking not only US military facilities, but also the infrastructure of Washington's allies in the region. According to former representatives of intelligence services, this may indicate a transition to a broader strategy of pressure. One of the former directors of the US intelligence services stated that Tehran is effectively trying to expand the geography of the conflict and draw as many Persian Gulf states as possible into it. In Washington, they understand that such a scenario could prove extremely dangerous. If new countries begin to be pulled into the conflict, it could lead to a large-scale regional war that would affect several major energy centers of the world at once. Meanwhile, at the military level, the situation also continues to deteriorate. In recent days, Iran has carried out a series of missile and drone attacks on targets in Persian Gulf countries, including areas near American military bases and ports. Some of these attacks were intercepted by air defense systems. However, some of the missiles and drones still reached their targets. The most alarming moment was that some of the strikes hit energy infrastructure facilities. Analysts believe that this may be only the beginning of a larger campaign. If this strategy continues, the world may face a real oil shock. Many experts remind that even short-term disruptions of supplies from the Persian Gulf are capable of causing a surge in fuel prices around the world. And if the conflict leads to a prolonged blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the consequences could be far more serious. Several possible scenarios for further developments are now being discussed inside the US administration. The first is a rapid military success, in which American and allied forces would be able to suppress Iran's missile capabilities and force it to stop the attacks. The second is a prolonged conflict in which both sides will continue striking each other while the region's energy infrastructure becomes a constant target. But there is also a third scenario that causes the greatest concern among economists. This is the scenario in which attacks on oil facilities continue, oil supplies are disrupted, and energy prices begin to rise in an avalanche-like manner. If this happens, the consequences may be felt not only by Middle Eastern countries, but by the entire global economy. Rising oil prices will inevitably lead to higher costs for fuel, transport services, and electricity. This in turn could trigger a new wave of inflation and a slowdown in economic growth in the world's largest economies. That is why many analysts are now closely watching how events will develop in the coming weeks. If the United States and its allies are unable to quickly stabilize the situation, the world may find itself on the brink of the largest energy crisis of the 21st century. And this means that the war, which began as a series of military strikes and political confrontations, is gradually turning into a global confrontation, where the main weapon becomes not only military power, but also control over oil, the resource on which the economy of the entire planet still depends. And it is at this moment that many analysts draw attention to another extremely important factor that could radically change the dynamics of the entire war. The point is that attacks on oil infrastructure may be only the first stage of a broader pressure strategy. According to a number of analytical centers in Europe and the United States, the Iranian leadership may attempt to expand this campaign by making not only the oil facilities themselves the main targets, but also the logistics of supply, tankers, export terminals, and even pipelines connecting oil fields with the ports of the Persian Gulf. For the global economy, this could become an even more destructive scenario, because even if the oil fields themselves continue production, disruption of transportation could effectively paralyze supplies to international markets. Some insiders in the energy industry claim that the largest oil traders have already begun discussing the so-called Strait of Hormuz crisis scenario, in which any serious damage to tankers or infrastructure would lead to a sharp reduction of oil supplies by tens of percent. In such a case, even several weeks of instability could trigger a chain reaction in the markets. Exchanges would begin to panic, governments would urgently increase their strategic fuel reserves, and oil prices could start rising literally every day. That is why many experts believe that the coming weeks will be decisive. If the United States and its allies are able to quickly stabilize the situation and protect the key energy facilities of the region, the crisis may remain local and limited. But if the attacks continue and the scale of destruction grows, the world may find itself on the threshold of a new energy era, in which oil once again becomes the main weapon of geopolitics, and events in the Middle East directly determine the economic future of dozens of countries around the world.